Mushroom Club, thank you all so much for coming. My apologies for my voice. I was yelling a lot yesterday. You know, I was cracking the whip and all that. So anyway, I'm here to introduce to you our keynote speaker for this year. It's Noah Siegel. Noah has graced us with his presence this year, which is fabulous because, you know, we're way down here in the corner of Oregon and it's hard to get these big name people down here. But we enticed him with a place to stay and a chance to talk to people about what he loves dearly, which is mushrooms. He brought some of his books along. I apologize if you didn't get one, and we're hoping to. We didn't have very many and they sold out quickly. If you have your own copy of your book and you haven't had him sign it yet, he will be here to sign. You can also maybe get Amazon to deliver by tomorrow. Get it signed then, I don't know. I was asking Noah, because I've never met the man, and I was asking him, what do I say about you? And he says, well, call me a Michael Hobo. Those were his words. He's from Massachusetts, a small town known as Royalston. I did not Google that, Noah, sorry. He's youngish, he's in his 30s. He is the co-author of Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast, a comprehensive guide to the fungi of coastal Northern California. They started working on it, him and his co-author, where did that name go? Christian Schwarz. Started working on that book in 2009, and they finished it and got it published by 2016. It is pretty much the most current guide there is right now. We're really lucky to have him. He's going to talk about the mushrooms of the Redwood Coast. I'm sure he would love questions. He just spent a month in Cameroon. This man travels the world. And he was working on ectomycorrhizal species in Cameroon. He spent 2 months this summer in New Zealand working on a brand new reference guide, which is a big deal. What else can I say about him? He has spent the last month in Washington and Oregon doing talks like this and identifying mushrooms. His field is taxonomy, and according to the young lady that came with him today, he is the best field mycologist in the world. So without further ado, Noah Siegel.
Thank you, Catherine. Bringing people with you to pump you up. I don't know. So yeah, a big thank you to the Wild Rivers Mushroom Club, and especially to Patty for organizing everything to get me here. It just so happened to work out this year that I was in Eugene last week for the Mount Pisgah event, and was able to come down here before going home for the first time. And been home for 4 days since the beginning of August. So yeah, it's normal for me though. So I mean, a fancy way to say what I do is I am a nomadic mycologist. So wherever the mushrooms are, I'll typically be there, which means Pacific Northwest in October, down into California, November, December, into January. And that's been my typical circuit for the last 10 years. And so Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast was kind of like the excuse of avoid winter in Massachusetts. I mean, it's cold there, it's snowy, and I'm not a fan. So it was a project that I decided to do 12 years ago now, and started it in the winter of January of 2009. So quite some time ago. And so really the 2010-11 season was the first season that was just like, out in the field pretty much every single day. Kind of the goal of it was to see every single mushroom I could growing there. Of course, you'll never see every mushroom. And get an understanding, an idea of what's there. And I mean, I'll get more into the book a little bit later on. But it's more just to show you the mushrooms there. If you do have questions, feel free to stick your hand up, and I will make up answers as I go along. The screen resolution is a little bit weird here. California is not that squat. So this is California's view, from California's perspective. You have California and you have nothing past there, right? How many people are from south of the border here? Oh, I know, a couple of hands go up and then like the rest say, okay, I'm comfortable enough to stick up my hand. In terms of floristic provinces, this is California. You know, the southern Oregon coast, pretty much from about Humbug Peak south, is all the same as you get in Northern California. So it's this floristic province that, you know, the trees, the plants are similar, the mushrooms are similar. So I come from Massachusetts. I come from central Massachusetts. If you draw a line from Boston to the New York border in the western part of the state, I'm right smack dab in the middle. If you draw a line from California, middle is about right there. Yet people in San Francisco call themselves Northern California. This really bugs me because I'm called Western Massachusetts because in Massachusetts we have this interstate that loops around Boston about 15 miles out, I-95. And anything west of that to the next loop, which is 495, is called Central Mass. And then anything west of 495, which is about 20 miles out, you only have 120 to go, is Western Mass. So the California skewed view of California, I don't think Northern California starts until about up here, because that's where you start getting the Northern California flora. The spruce trees, the fir, the hemlock, and of course with them the mushrooms. So, of course, the redwoods, it's a little bit different. Here's California from a bigger perspective. So, like I said, the reason why I chose California as a spot to start going, and then soon after I went there, decided to do a book project for that area. I'm sitting on all the stuff in the Northeast. I just haven't done it yet. Part of the reason is because there's a really large, saturated market for East Coast field guides. And for the West Coast, people are using Mushrooms Demystified, that I was, 4 years old when that book came out, and All That the Rain Promises and More, which came out in 1990. So it's been a really long time before there was anything new for the West Coast. And in that 30+ years, there's a lot more knowledge about what's out here and how it differs from the rest of the rest of the world. A lot of these names we were using were European. So if you haven't learned mushrooms yet, you're in a much better place than people who know mushrooms. Because the people who know them are just complaining about all those name changes. If you learn new names, you don't know any better. Of course, as you can see, there's a lot of California which is not forested. Pretty much all of that and all of that. And then there's a lot of California that I just don't even consider, it doesn't count. Like if you're south of that's a world that's foreign to me. But then as you get up here, there's kind of like this ecozone like this. That's all one system. And then north of that, Sitka spruce continues up into southeast Alaska. Girdwood, Alaska is the last valley where you get Sitka spruce, which is about 40 miles southeast of Anchorage. So that's a continuous habitat zone from the, like 2 groves of trees in Mendocino and then the north side of the Lost Coast, all the way up into southeast Alaska. So that coastal spruce forest, which you're smack dab in, the southern portion of it here, but that's a pretty special mushroom habitat, and it does make it down into the northern bit of California there. Just a close-up view. So of course, the mushroom habitat is where you have these darker green colors. Because the lighter green colors, that's all wine country, but even where it's not, it's really dry. There's a reason why it burns. It's meant to burn. It's a forest type. It's not really forest. It's a scrubland that evolved to burn about every 15 years or so. And if it doesn't burn every 15 years, what happens? Well, when it does burn, it burns out of control and torches everything in that path. So the zone I was really interested in was, this coastal zone, because the mushroom season starts up here in October, as you well know, and then it continues all the way down to Southern California into February or early March. So when's winter in Massachusetts? Well, October, November, it starts getting cold out. Mushrooms are gone from my area about the first week in November, and you don't see them again until April or May. So it's a perfect opportunity to come out here and say, okay, I'll start, I'll do that. And then the Redwood Coast zone was pretty much that zone that fruited that period of time. And so this is a really crude drawing of the Redwood Coast region. it includes multiple habitat types. So in the southern portion, you start picking up in southern Mendocino County, but as you go south, you get these live oak woodlands that, you know, the live oak continues down into Mexico, into Baja California, and, you know, it starts petering out, certainly on the warm, dry sides as you go further north, but, you know, as you go south, those conifers start disappearing, and the wetter areas get the oaks, the drier areas get that, you know, that chaparral scrub. So it's a continuation of that habitat. The redwoods do occur down in Monterey County, but you'll see a picture of them in a second. But they really get, you know, in the Santa Cruz Mountains is where you start getting big redwoods. But right now, anyway, you know, you really have to get up north before you start seeing the big ones. But, you know, restricted to the wet river valleys. The tan oak, madrone, Douglas fir, you know, that Northern California, the most common forest type of that zone, you know, really starts in about Sonoma County, goes north up into this area. So anywhere you go inland here, you get that forest type. And it's a really diverse, really good mushroom habitat. You know, of all the West Coast forests, it's probably your best choice to go to that forest type. And then within these zones, you have these coastal pine forests. Every single group of pines has different species associated with them. It would be the Monterey pines are down here, bishop pine, or shore pine. And each one of those zones has its unique group of fungi and some overlap. The Monterey cypress from this habitat, which was it had shrunk, the range just had shrunk to just Point Lobos and Pebble Beach area in Monterey County, is now widely planted across the coast. That has a group of fungi, probably about 40 species, which just occur in the duff of the cypress. So all these ecosystems, these zones here, have their set of fungi. But if you come in off of that, into the dry habitat, well, you're in a completely new ecosystem. You know, as you come into the ponderosa pine, the white fir, this is, the Coast Range in California it's what's called Sierra mixed conifer forest. So it's dominated by ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, white fir, chalcedrus, incense cedar, and that's kind of like up through here. The Siskiyou Knot area has a mix of everything. Yeah. It's coast floristic stuff, it's coastal influence, it's Sierra influence, it's Cascadian influence, and it has these remnant populations of Rocky Mountain stuff like Engelmann spruce. So everything all mixed together in one little area. The problem is it's a little bit dry, so not the best mushroom habitats unless it's a wet year. So the namesake for this region, the coast redwood, I must say, coming from the East Coast, these trees are huge. It's taller to the first branch on these trees than the tallest East Coast tree. Not that I ever look up to see them, because I'm going to go home with a sore neck because I had to look up and face the audience today. Unnatural. You do notice that when you start to walk around the tree, it takes you about an hour to make it around that tree. Because you see a mushroom, you stop, you photograph it, you move on to the next one, and you're still at the base of the same tree. So they're impressive. However, the impressive stands are mostly gone. You know, that's commonplace with forest out here. I mean, we cut most of them down. There's less than 1% of the old growth redwoods still left. And pretty much every single stand that's left is protected property. State park, national park, or some state redwood league land. The big spots down here, Big Basin, of course, Muir Woods. That's what most foreigners think of. Foreigners being not from California, think of big redwoods, because that's the closest to San Francisco. You really don't start getting into the good stands until you're up in Humboldt County, Humboldt Redwood State Park, and of course the stuff in Prairie Creek and Redwood National Park, and up in Jedediah Smith near Crescent City. So those little teeny stands, I mean these remnant stands, and here's Prairie Creek Redwood State Park, here's Highway 101, which was rerouted to go right outside the park, and of course everything east of that, what is it? It's weed-filled tree farms. It's this progression of mostly Douglas fir and western hemlock that's cut every 30 or 40 years. It's full of blackberry, it's full of phragmites, the grass, it's a total mess. And you can really see these boundary lines of the actual, forest and the tree farm. And so unfortunately, that's most of California, that's most of the West Coast. I mean, we have these fragment populations of fungi that, and forest types that you only find in the remnant old growth, and it's non-existent once you go out of that. So, another issue is climate change. I'm like in sketchy country talking about evolution and climate change here, right? I come from Massachusetts, it's safe there.
It's fine here.
You're in a safe room.
You're in a safe room.
Yeah. So one of the major drawbacks of doing the book when I did it was the severe droughts in California. It added a couple of years to the project because you just go out there and you wouldn't find any mushroom. This is Big Lagoon down it's just north of Trinidad down in California. It's a Sitka spruce forest. It's one of the furthest south solid stands of Sitka spruce. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, it's a fringe population. And what happens to fringe populations? When climate changes, this happens. When you don't get summer fog, which happened over 2014-15, you can see the difference a year made. And this tree will probably die off in California in some of our lifetimes.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is what's happening. There was in this single year, there's about 50% needle loss. Most of the understory moss died. The moss recovered fairly well because actually 15 is a pretty wet year there. They have gotten rain since, and they've had a couple of good foggy summers. But there was about 20 to 30% tree mortality over the drought span.
Wow.
And what will happen is this will continue, and these trees will move north. This matters because there's some fungi down in this area that don't occur further north. And the question is, with these mature / old growth stands, so fragmented now, is will the mushrooms get to the next stand? It's not a continuous habitat.
Right.
So we'll see. This is the northern part of the Lost Coast in California. That's that big chunk that sticks out between Humboldt and Mendocino County. Really wild country. Lots of forested on the inland side of the ranges, but a lot of the coast stuff is open, like this open prairie bluff stuff. Of course, as you go further south, you start running into people. I try to avoid people. So of course, this is from Mill Valley, Marin County, looking down towards San Francisco. This is kind of where it switches over. These are live oak bay laurel hillsides. In shaded, sheltered areas, you get redwoods, north slopes, river valleys. But as you go south and cross into Peopleville, it gets drier and drier. And this is the coastline going south towards Santa Cruz, which is the furthest north beach town in California. And then you get wild stuff again down the Big Sur. So the Big Sur is the southernmost portion of the Coast Redwood Range. And down there you look at this and this is not redwood habitat, is it? But if you go into these really steep eroded canyons there's tiny stunted redwoods, old growth redwoods that occur in there.
Wow.
And so these are really fringe habitat stuff once again. I mean, it's hanging on there, but not for long. But it just goes to show you that these things can survive in really harsh environments in small niches. And what we did quite a few surveys on, when I say we, my co-author in the book, Christian Schwartz and I, early on in this project to see how many of these species that were in redwood duff up north occurred down there. And we picked up quite a few of them. So the mushrooms are hanging on with the trees there. Just you need a wet year, and after the first 2 years of the project, it didn't fruit again until 2 years ago down there. It went 7 years without fruiting. Just 2 drives. Oops. For some reason, my remote likes jumping, so it doesn't want me to talk about certain things. Switching. So It doesn't happen much. So moving on, I'm just going to run over some of the other parts of California before I get to the mushrooms. The Southern Cascade Range is the volcanic portion of California where you have Mount Shasta, Mount Lassen. Feather River Canyon is kind of the dividing line between that and the Sierra Nevada range. In this sort of habitat, this is a chunk that continues up into about central Oregon, certainly that whole Crater Lake area, that east side pine forest. It's all similar forest, and as you get up towards like Sisters area, it starts getting more into the northern Cascade floristic province. Of course, Mount Shasta, you know, if you drive down I-5, you'll probably see this. Great big mountain that rises up in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forest. So Mount Lassen is, you know, about 100 miles or so south of that. Once again, you know, volcanic peak rising up, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. So this is, this is the looking. This is actually looking southwest towards the Sierra Nevada range, volcanic towards granitic. So similar fungi, but some difference there. I've done a lot of work in this area, both mushroom survey work and botany surveys. I was looking at the green stuff. I needed to do plant work because there's not much mushroom work out there. What's happening in a lot of this forest, you know, the forest fires, they are bad. This was post-burn 14 years later. If you looked at it, there's not a single tree regrowing in that area. It's not good for mushrooms. Yes, you'll find your morels the first year after that, but it's a while before you find mushrooms. Of course, it's really good for wildflowers. You know, they love that kind of stuff. You know, the forest burns completely off, and you can find a lot of pretty flowers, but not very many mushrooms. So this was, this kept me interesting for, for a summer. But I was really out there in the summer to try to get photographs for the next book. So as I was looking at plants, I was always looking for mushrooms. And it was another excuse to do work in California. Because in these similar habitats, yes, you'd hit a meadow that would be full of flowers every once in a while, but you would also get into these red fir forests. And if you look at the understory, there's literally 6 plants that grow in these forests. I loved it. And other botanists loved it, the fact that I loved it, because they wanted to find plants. I didn't care if I found plants or not. I was completely happy going out here, writing Monardella odoratissima, Penstemon gracillensis on my list, Amy's magnifica, and be done for the day and spend the whole day walking around looking for mushrooms. It works for me. So in this forest type, all the moisture comes from snow. Pretty much. They rarely get rain there. Most of the precip comes in snow. Snow melts off. Mushrooms come up. They're all over the place, and they slowly disappear. And you wait again for next year. Occasionally, your first precip in the fall will be rain, and you'll get mushrooms or snow will come and it'll melt off. It's a really dry habitat, so you get really interesting fungi there. Cascade foothill stuff. This is near Lake Shasta. More survey work I was doing, and so this is like all these weird limestone hills, lots of oaks, lots of blue oak in there, black oak, gray pine, really unusual habitat. But once again, it has its unique set of fungi. So wherever, California is a really big state, but it's also a short distance to get to, with this habitat here in the coastal areas, there's probably less than 50% overlap with number of species there. So as soon as you get into this habitat, only 100 miles away or so, most of your mushrooms are different. So with this one, I was doing mushroom surveys at Lake Shasta for their dam expansion project, and they flew us in on helicopter to the mushroom sites because it was cheaper to fly us in and drop us off than have us hike into these places. So that was quite the way to go mushrooming. I've actually had this since in Alaska. We were doing alpine, so high elevation mushrooming, and they flew us up to these mountaintops, dropped us off. We looked for mushrooms all day. They come back up at night, pick us up. It's quite the way to do it. So with the Shasta area, like I mentioned before, I was doing fungal surveys for the Forest Service. They're part of the Northwest Forest Plan. They don't do them in California very often. But it's going out and looking for these rare fungi. I do rare with quotation marks is because the fact is we really don't know what's rare and what isn't. We make guesses. Some of these things are quite rare. But then some of them, so this one here, Gelanodiscus, is a little teeny jelly fungus. It's an Ascomyces jelly that grows on yellow cedar or incense cedar needles. Okay, specialized habitat, right? Okay, but it only grows on these needles on the edges of melting snowbanks, and it's only visible for about a day to 2 days after the snow melts. Is that rare, or do you have to be in the right place at the right time? Certainly some of them, like the mythical myces, it's restricted to seeps and old growth forest. Pretty specialized habitat. Disturbed forests don't seem to have this species. So some of these things, yeah, probably more rare. So in 2 years of surveys, spring, fall, we had over 600 species in the Mount Shasta area. Before that, about 200 species were known from that area. So if you look for them, you will find them. This stuff is the survey and managed stuff. I won't get into that. Other than the fact that California is trying to get fungi on the Forest Service sensitive list. Right now, the only stuff that falls in that category is stuff that is on the forest in the Northwest Forest Plan, so those northern forests that are on the Northwest list. And the issue with that is there's a few things on that list that are very common in California that are rare in the Cascades in Oregon and Washington. So they made this rare species list in the Northwest when they are, Turbinella spinarii is the most common macrofungus in the Sierra Nevada. It's on the rare species list in Oregon and Washington. And then in this habitat type, 20% of the survey and managed things are Hypogeus fungi. And remember how I said this habitat gets really dry? And what happens when stuff gets dry? Well, who collected mushrooms the last few days?
Yeah.
They dry in place, right? So your above ground fruit body is up there, and the winds and dry weather come, it dries up. It's not going to, it can't release spores when it's dry. But in these really dry habitats in the mountains, if you go underground, you emit an odor, and something comes and digs you up and eats you and spreads the spores. Well, it's a really good way of adapting to a dry habitat. And because of that, there's over 200 species of Hypogeus, so underground truffle-like fungi described from California. There's probably about 600 species of these in Western North America. And so, of course, so what do you think this is? It's a coral fungus, a Romeria, that's gone underground. So it's a Gatiaria. This is another one down here. And what this is the Gatiaria has all its branches clumped up into a little tight ball. It goes underground. It waits for something to dig it up and eat it. So when they're mature, they emit odors. This particular one smells like caramel bananas and acetone. It's a fingernail polish remover and caramel bananas. The first sniff is like you get all banana. It's really nice, sweet odor. Then your second or third sniff, you start getting the chemical. And so I mean, it's fairly common in the high elevation red fir forest. I decided to try to flavor yogurt with it because I think, can I get that banana smell? No. So just stuck it in, open the yogurt container, put a truffle on in a container with that, larger Tupperware, closed it up, took one bite of the yogurt, and didn't want to see this mushroom ever again. It was disgusting. There's other things which are, so this, any guesses what this thing is? It's a stinkhorn relative. So stinkhorn, some of them make these really elaborate, we have the Colachis rubra, which makes that really big red basket. The spore mass on it smells like rotting meat, attracts flies and burying beetles and stuff. They wallow through that spore mass, they go off and spread the spores. Well, similar idea, except it's all underground. Most of them smell like sulfur, rotting eggs, something like that. Stuff smells them, digs them up, eats them, spreads the spores. You can eat them. They're not going to make you sick, but ooh. This thing here is an underground albatross. So it's Leucogaster. So if you know the sheep polypore, really common here on the coast under spruce, white things are kind of yellowish staining. Same thing happens with these, except they lack that elaborate structure. So pretty much everything can go below ground. The next section, the Central Valley. Of course, what is this known for?
Farming. Oh,
Yeah, it's not known for this anymore. This is what it used to be like. It was one giant wetland. It was actually very fertile soil, so now it's one giant wetland that's all farmland. And so on the wet springs, this was, that really wet spring a few years ago when everything in the Central Valley flooded like it should. This is what it looked like. But of course, it's just one giant farm. And what it means for mushrooms is all the nitrogen fertilizer they're putting on it, well, guess what happens with that? It gets into the duff, it blows east into the Sierra. Nitrogen reduces the fruit body production of most ectomycorrhizal fungi. So it means a lot fewer mushrooms will fruit because of all this fertilizer blowing in the forest there. Some fascinating papers on that, just the nitrogen fallout from farmlands on ectomycorrhizal fungal communities. There's tons of orchards, walnut orchards up near Chico. Most of our stone fruits, most of our nuts, most of the world's almonds are grown there. It's amazing the food produced in that area, but it's not very good for mushrooms. It never was. It's kind of like that swampy habitat is kind of boring. For me, anyway. Sierra Nevada range, granitic mountains that seem to go on forever. This is down in the southern Sierra. Yeah, there's not very many mushrooms up on the rocks, but it's known for Yosemite and stuff like that. All the forests there. Just the diverse conifer forest. And of course, it has giant sequoia, which is the close relative for coast redwood. There's no mushrooms that the fungi that associate with these things are soil fungi, avascular mycorrhizal stuff, but above ground there's a few things that grow only on the needles of these. So and there's also a morel species that grows with them. Something to keep in mind. It's a really good morel spot. So it's Sequoia National Park, National Monument. They do control burning, which keeps the understory really open, which makes it perfect for black maroons. You're allowed 1 quart per person per day in the park. Don't get caught with more. As soon as you get over the east side of the crest, it turns into this, which is relatively dry, scrub, sagebrush scrub forest. There's a lot of bears in the Sierra Nevada. Who's afraid of bears in the woods? I can admit it. Doing work there, my record for one day was 9 bears in a single day. They run away from you. Most of them. It's not something you really have to worry about. I am far more scared of people in the woods than bears in the woods.
oh yeah.
Yeah. That last part of California, kind of ignoring this section, we won't use not California. Not even humane, is the desert portion. And yes, the deserts there's desert fungi. So this Podaxis, it's called the desert shaggy mane. It's actually closer related to agaricus, to your button mushrooms, than it is to the Coprinus. There's another one that's really closely related to shaggy mane, so it's there as well, that looks sort of like that. But they are these mushrooms that You can see the spores are all produced inside of that. It's a cap that like never opens. And then the bottom rips some, and when it's windy, it's always windy there, it rattles that cap, and it's like this salt shaker of spores blowing all over the place. And then the spores land somewhere. If they land in a wash or a gully, they sit there and they wait and they wait, and it rains, and then the mycelium grows on buried debris and stuff. It waits again, another rain comes, a year or two later, and then all these fruit flies pop up. And then they sit around for about a year or two because nothing decays there. So it's quite a fascinating area. Of course, so once you get out of the desert into the east side of the Cascades, they get summer thunderstorms there. And if you want king boletes, look to see where those storms have been on the east side of the Sierra and go there, because you can get tons of them and very little competition. Of course, if it has rained there, this happens. The deserts are a fascinating area botanically, mycologically. It's something to be desired. But really, you can still go there for wildflowers and see a couple mushrooms. Or you can say, I want to go look for desert fungi and then, just actually look at plants the whole time. That's what I did. This was in Death Valley, and I was like, okay, there's Podaxis fruiting there. I don't have photos of that. I have to go and get that. And while I'm there, I'll just look at plants for a week. Another really fascinating habitat is the bristlecone pine forest in the White Mountains so it's a mountain range east of Sierra Nevada. And there are mushrooms here. There's fungi associated with these pine trees. They almost never fruit because it's one of the, it's very dry. Mm-hmm. And this tree is 4,000 years old or so. Youngin. It's a fascinating ecosystem. But of course, these pine trees need ectomycorrhizal fungi to grow. So those fungi are with them. So that's an overview of California. Now that that's over, we can get to the mushrooms. So, like we said, the excuse mushrooms of the Redwood Coast was avoid winter. And going to the coast, so the mountain season is spring and fall. And in summer, when you get thunderstorms. So there's a lot of mushrooms back east in the summer. I wasn't interested in giving up my summers to come out to California where it's going to be 110 in the Central Valley. It's going to be really hot and dry in most of the Sierra Nevada, and you're going to get a spot with a summer thunderstorm that will have mushrooms for a week or a few days and then dry out again. So I said, okay, so that coastal region, so came up with this idea for the book. Big arguments with the publisher over, they wanted a field guide. They wanted a 320-page field guide with 400 species. Christian and I wanted a reference guide of about 750 pages and 900 to 1,000 species. So they said, well, we'll do this field guide, no problem doing that. And I just immediately rejected and said, it's not what I want to do. There's plenty of field guides out there. Not for the West Coast, but there's some out there. So I went back to him and said, I want at least 750 species. Or I actually said I want at least 700. And they really liked the number 750 because it's more than any mushrooms demystified. Mushrooms demystified are 700. So that was a selling point for them. So in order to do that, we said, okay, so we picked up all the book blanks and said, what's the best size for this? If we were to do 750 species, we have to have X number of doubles and single species per page. And so we came up with this 7.5 by 9 size book, and the most pages you could do in a book that size in colored paper was 608. And so they said, okay, you can do that book. So we're a bit surprised, because certainly, the more pages these books are, the less money they're making from them. They can publish, they can charge you $30, $29.95 for a 320-page book, when they're only charging 35 lists for a 608-page book. Mm-hmm. So this costs twice as much to produce than the size of book they wanted to do. And they're making pennies more from it. So So yeah, we managed to commit some of that. They gave us our contract called for 210,000 words. When we put it all together, we had written it in sections. So the way we do is Christian had his groups, I had my groups. We would, one person, whoever, so if I was wrestling, the Russell bicolor description, if I wrote that, I would write that, I would send it to Christian who would review it. Any changes, we would run by each other, saying, I think you should add this. The original description writer would go back and do that. And then once we had that, I would go over it and try to make it as one voice as possible, because that's what the publishers are really worried about. With dual author books, is it really sounding like it was two different people.
Yeah.
And so once we had that, we'd finish the section, move on to the next section. We put this thing together, and it was 290,000 words. So only 80,000 over what we were supposed to do. Sent it in to them, they didn't seem to notice this. And that's why the font's so small, because we just wanted as much information as possible in there, with as many species as possible. And we actually wanted more species, but there's this giant cut list that never made it. And then when we got it back, the goal was to try to fill out these pages as much as possible, give you as much information possible about this book. We wrote the descriptions based on mushrooms we collected and found, not repeating previous information. That was one of my major complaints, still is, about a lot, especially these East Coast books that are coming out. They repeat the same stuff again and again and again from previous books and don't actually look at the mushrooms. And especially now we know that, Russell bicolor is a good example of that. It's a mushroom described from Vermont. East Coast thing completely different from the thing we applied that name to out here. But rather than take what was previously described with mostly East Coast material, just wrote this up from the West Coast material, stuff we find. And so that was different from pretty much every other mushroom book, which is really unfortunate. 869 pictures in this book. There's a lot of gloss. And that's partly because color is so much cheaper to publish now. Thank you, China. But it makes a big difference when you're identifying mushrooms. A black and white picture or a written description does not tell you much compared to a photograph of a mushroom. So it's a lot easier to identify from photos. And of course, up-to-date taxonomy, at least until March 5th, 2016. And that's when the publishers let us get away with something that most mushroom book authors have not been able to do. And that was, the manuscript was turned in April 1st, 2014, or 2015, I mean. And they gave us almost a year to change names on stuff, which is unheard of. But California Mushrooms, the Desjardins Wood Stevens book, it was about 24 months between manuscript submission and publication on that. By the time that book came out, 24 names had changed. Wow. Yeah. So there's about 10 names that have changed now so far, and it just came out in August 2016. It's not bad. Partly because we knew about a lot of these changes and jumped the gun on some of them. We just, being aware of what work was being done on what groups helped. So yeah, hopefully, this book works fairly well, hopefully. If it doesn't, let me know why. Because if I do another one, I can fix that. And what I'm really curious and interested is, I want people to use it, identify mushrooms, and let me know what they come up with, especially if you're wrong. Because if you're wrong, there's got to be a reason for that. And I have to write something better or rewrite it so the next time you're looking it up, you won't be led astray by something. So that's why misidentifications are as valuable as actual identification. So I really like seeing people try to apply names on stuff. Even if you don't know what it is, give it a try. I want to see what you end up with. And so if you are doing this, who has the app iNaturalist? Not very many of you. Okay, you all need to get it. If you have a smartphone, get that app. Because that allows you to photograph a mushroom. You see the mushroom, you photograph it. it gets all the metadata from it. Location, date, time, all of that gets posted. If you don't want somebody to know where your chanterelle patch is, chances are I know where it is anyway. You can obscure locations. So you can hide it, it'll give you a dot on the map within like 2-3 miles of the location. If it's a 3-mile dot, nobody will ever find it. So you can hide your secret spots, but it'll still give this metadata. What's really important is getting more and more people using that. You'll get names on your mushrooms. People go through there and ID your stuff, and if nobody's doing it, just tag me in it, Noah_Siegel, and I will see it. I try to do all the West Coast stuff, but there's over 1 million observations of fungi on the site now. So what's really important is, remember I was talking about the spruce disappearing? There's probably mushrooms disappearing too. And the fact is we have no baseline data on that, because who's come to Brookings, Oregon every single year for the last 50 years and said, okay, you have these species this year, these species the next year, and can notice a trend of, we used to have this, it used to be really common, it's no longer anymore. But the more people using iNaturalist, it will log all that data, and 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we'll have these trends on species. And that's been the most difficult thing with mushrooms, is trying to get them on these rare species lists, is we have no existing data on trends. So, was this thing common 10 years ago and it is now? Where were these things introduced? That's a case with, there's mushrooms that are introduced to areas. There's some really bad weed mushrooms in California and the Northwest now. So, iNaturalist, look it up when you leave here. If you do it now, I'll see you on your phone. It's okay though. So what I'm going to do is run through the ecozones on the Redwood Coast and talk about the mushrooms there. There's kind of a Where's Waldo here. Can you find my co-author?
What? Oh, in the.
So Christian's in this photo somewhere. There. So this little sprout off the redwood trunk would be a big tree back east. So, tree, sprout, person. Like I said, it's really a fascinating tree. Unfortunately, it's also an ecosystem that's changed quite a bit, even these old growth forests. So what used to happen in these old growths, it doesn't happen anymore. So who's ever gone through the redwood groves? And who's ever seen all those big fire scars in those trees?
Yeah.
Right.
They don't let them burn anymore. And because of that, you have these impenetrable thickets of evergreen huckleberry and sword fern. And because of that, the fruit body production of these hygroscopies is way down.
Uh-huh.
So some of these things used to be really common, you rarely see anymore. And it appears the reason for that is the lack of disturbance or undergrowth clearing in these old growth redwoods. And so that's just one change just based on our management of these forests or mismanagement of these forests. Forests did not, they were never left alone to grow naturally. There was always some sort of disturbance. Disturbance on a small scale helps fungi. An understory burn that goes through and maybe kills, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20 canopy trees is the exact thing you would want for a lot of these fungi. And plants, it creates these canopy openings, everything gets a chance to grow up, it gives these fungi a chance to fruit. The understory is more open, allowing a lot of these are all waxy caps, hygroscope, or what used to be known as hygroscope, there's a few name changes in there, allowing these things to fruit. The same is true for all these leptonias. It appears that the center of world diversity on this group is the redwood forest. And that means that there's about 70 species of blue to purple to gray to black leptonia. Wow. Just in the redwoods. And over probably about 120 or so species of leptonia total. Really diverse group. Impossible to identify a species too. So some of I will say with a lot of these waxy caps, if we're using a name that's not from here, it needs a new name. So something like Hygroscope coccinea, described from Europe, the stuff out here is a distinct species. it happens again and again and again. So the scarlet waxy cap, I mean, bright red mushrooms that just like, you know, they really shine. Redwood forests are really dark, and these things just pop out of the dub. Like tistamite is this big red boy. It can be up to like 4 inches across or so. None of these things are edible, but they're certainly brightly colored. The parrot mushroom, really pretty, really slimy. It's hard to pick this thing up. It can be anywhere to green to orange to yellow.
Wow, that's pretty.
It's a beautiful mushroom. It's a really common mushroom, you know, in the redwood groves, but really easy to overlook because what else has this color? Redwood sorrel leaves, which there's a carpet of that on the ground where these things grow, and hidden under there. The pink waxy cap is an unusual one in the fact the time of the year it fruits. So this thing fruits in the dead of winter. There's almost nothing else up at that time, or it's just like remnant mushrooms that are sticking around. And all of a sudden you'll be walking along and see this pink mushroom. And that's its fruiting time. You know, winter, early spring. Gliophorus flavifolius. This is actually a species that got red listed on the IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature fungal red list, because it's only known from about 7 sites total, and went about 30 years without even being seen. So it's absolutely unmistakable, bright chrome yellow gills, a slimy cap with a white disc, really slimy porcelain stipe, absolutely nothing else like it. Yet, you know, it's known from like 7 locations: Santa Cruz County, kind of like East Bay Hills, Marin County, Sonoma County, and Humboldt County. So pretty disjunct spots on a map. Hygrospia virescens is another quite fascinating one. So I used to consider this a rare mushroom. And this is an example on why it's really difficult to, you know, quantify and justify that. So this is a species that if you have Mushrooms Demystified, David Aurora's book, it's in there. He talks about seeing a really big fruiting of it in Van Dam State Park, Mendocino County in 1972. So David went 40 years without seeing this fungus again. And then at a foray in Mendocino in 2012, somebody brought a single specimen in from a foray, brought it into the ID table. Never seen this mushroom before. It's distinct enough. You read a description of a dry lime green waxy cap with pallid gills. It stands out. And so I knew immediately what it was. I asked the person where they got it. We went back there the next day, and not only did we see it, we saw it in like 3 different spots there. So this is up in Mendocino County. I call up Christian, who's down in Santa Cruz County, and tell him, you'll never guess the mushroom I found today. Because this was, something we talked about, these species that were described in California that were really distinctive, and there was no modern records of them. So he said, well, whatever you found is not going to beat what I found. Now, we pretty much said Hygrospia virescens at the same time. So here's a mushroom that I was up, a few hundred miles north of him, in a spot that was like later in the mushroom season, more mid-fall, late fall. He was down in Santa Cruz County, which was just starting the mushroom season, typically too early for waxy caps. They're really a cold-blooded mushroom. Yet this mushroom, over the next 10 days, me and other people found this thing in about 12 different sites, from Santa Cruz County up to Humboldt County. So it had this synchronized mass fruiting across a really wide range in California, different parts of the mushroom season, but it popped up all over the place and then disappeared. So we have seen it a couple of times since. It did fruit the next year as well, just much smaller numbers. But looking back at data, this happened in like 1990, 1991 on the Redwood National Park survey. So Redwood National Park has had, mostly through David Largent, has had continuous mushroom surveys for almost 40 years now. And so that's like the only good baseline data we have for Northern California. It had 2-year fruiting window, 90, 91, wasn't seen before, hasn't been seen since in that area. But that's, I mean, so that's why, so this mushroom is probably thriving. It's probably doing fine, it just fruits really rarely. So that's, I mean, but that's true with a number of fungi. There's a bunch of fungi that are common but rarely fruit, so we think they're rare. And there's probably a bunch of fungi that are rare but fruit commonly. Yeah, something to think about besides chanterelles. So Leptonia carnea is a big blue mushroom. There's very few blue mushrooms. That's one of California's blue ones. It's a really striking species. Really stands out. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. So this it was known mostly from Humboldt and Mendocino County. We did find it in Santa Cruz County, and this one was down in Monterey County, furthest south, or next to furthest south redwood tree. This was growing out there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of species in California which still need names. So if you hear about all this, this hidden diversity of mushrooms in the tropics and how we should be there more often, doing more work there. Don't overlook your backyard, because a lot of your species are undescribed. Some of them are because of misapplied names, some are just nobody's ever looked at them. So every time you go out there, you're seeing species, probably seeing species that don't have names. New to science. Yeah, we don't care much about that for some reason. They're not birds, that's why we don't care. The Monterey cypress habitat, it has a lot of agaricus species that grow in that habitat. This is under a single cypress tree, 4 different species there. This one here is Escapee. It's your white button mushroom that's now wild.
Oh wow, that's really
Just an example of what you can find under a single tree. A bunch of these things, at least in the eucalyptus caves of California, were only known from under cypress. And a few of them still, Pattersonii, Brunio fibrillosus, these things are only known from under cypress. They only grow in that Monterey cypress belt. This is a really good edible one. All parts of it stain red when you scrape it. Just a pretty mushroom, but known from Monterey to Mendocino County. Liloceps is this big, giant one. The caps can get over a foot across. This is one of the cypress things that found eucalyptus duff and likes that. So you can find quite a bit of it on the eucalyptus, which is a weed tree in California. So it's 2 really difficult duffs to decay, but it has the right enzymes to break that material down. The Prince Agaricus augustus, you get that one up here. More of a summertime mushroom, especially fog drip period. Don't give up on mushrooms. They're out there all year. Certain things like this, like the summer. Yeah.
We had a big patch of it about a week ago.
Yeah. Probably because it got hot and dry again. You're almost 90 here, weren't you?
Yeah, 86 in Smith River.
That's just wrong. Well, 2 weekends ago, I was at a foray in Washington, and the group I was leading, we're only about 2,100 feet, but we were mushrooming 4 inches of snow. So depending on where you've been, it's quite the extremes, because Washington has been really wet and really cold. And Oregon was really wet. Most of Oregon was really wet until recently. Certainly, but Washington has started raining this year in late July, and hasn't stopped. It was an amazing season up north. So one thing that's happening with Agaricus is we had Agaricus californicus in kind of like in the fringe habitats, wood edges, wood margins, meadow edges, and then Agaricus agriniferus under the cypress. So what's happened is Agaricus xanthodermis and Bisporus, 2 introduced species, have come into these habitats and really displaced the native fungi there. And so, do you have Agaricus xanthodermis up here yet? Lucky you. It made it to Arcata, I think it was 2012 was the first record of it, or maybe it was 2011. It was growing on like next to Humboldt State University, just in like the landscape areas, wood chipped areas around the school there. By 2015, it was the most common lawn mushroom in Arcata. When it gets to an area, it does this mass takeover, mostly urban areas, but really quickly colonizes this area, fruits in large numbers, and then slowly, tapers back some. So it made it to Seattle about 8 or 10 years ago. It's been like Eugene area it appeared to be introduced to that area fairly, 20 years ago or so? Susie, numbers on that? So not that long ago. But now one of the most common fungi you'll see in people's lawns or gardens. So it's really pervasive where it grows. Bisporous, escaped white button mushrooms like that cypress habitat, and just a lot strong. These are really strong growers, so they outcompete the native stuff that didn't have that competition there, and so they just were not used to it. Moving on to another group, Lepiotas, beautiful group of mushrooms. There's a lot of really toxic species, some deadly poisonous species in this group. Stuff like the shaggy parasols, which are now in the genus Chlorophyllum, are good edible ones, but there's some really brightly colored ones, like this Leucoagaricus. It's close to Decorata, a species described from Oregon, but the really pink one under cypress needs a new name. These are the shaggy parasols. So the two common ones, Brunium and Olivieri. Most people can eat these with no problem. Some people can't. We don't know if it's the problem, there used to be 3 species going by the name Lepiota rhacodes, and most people can't tell them apart. So maybe one of these is more toxic. This is the Chlorophyllum mollidites, which is the leading case of mushroom poisonings in the U.S. Why is that? Well, it's one of the most common mushrooms in the U.S. It loves southeastern U.S. in lawns and gardens and stuff. Pretty much any grassy area in the southeast, anywhere you get hot, humid weather, that thing could show up. Really common in Southern California, but it is spreading northward. It's in eastern Oregon and eastern Washington now. So anywhere you get hot, humid summer, fall, it can show up. It has greenish spores. So something you don't want to eat, a shaggy parasol green spores. So moving up to a zone that's really familiar to you, any of this coastal Sitka spruce habitat. It's one of my favorite mushroom habitats in the world. Especially when you get into these mature open spruce stands, it's having the same problem of the understory getting choked out, mostly by salal in the spruce, but also evergreen. This is not natural. There was checks and balances to keep that down. So certainly when you get these open spruce zones, it's a lot better. And one of my favorite fungi of this zone is the Hydnellum cyanopodium. It's a blue tooth fungus that bleeds red droplets. So strawberries and cream, which is the red droplets in the white background. I guess this is strawberries and blueberries. But it's a beautiful mushroom. It's quite rare. And mostly restricted to the southern portion of the Sitka spruce forest. So it's something you can go out on the coast here and see. It's also the world hotspot for Phaeocalibia, which is a group of fungi which have these big, long, tapering taproots. There's blue ones, there's green ones, there's lots of brown and orange ones, purple ones, but it's about 75% of the world's species occur in the Northwest. Including Phaeocalibia phalanx, which has these lilac gills and a green cap. It's a beautiful little mushroom, blends into the moss really well, but next time you're out in that spruce grove and it's wet, look for it. You also have lots of Cortnarius here. People tend to ignore this group, and it's unfortunate. So in terms of mushroom groups, it is the most diverse genus of mushrooms in the world. Cortnarius. Pretty much anywhere that has ectomycorrhizal trees, so the trees which have this mutualistic association with fungi, will have some Cortinaria species. The temperate ecosystem are loaded with them. So Pacific Northwest has probably 600 species of Cortinarias. You can add probably about 150 or 200 more if you include California, so Western North America. Just unbelievable diversity. And some really pretty ones. Cortinaria cyanides is a really big one. Banduza arensis. I mean, the whole mushroom's covered with slime. It's purple slime in the stem, brown cap. Beautiful mushroom, very common in the spruce forest. Named for Banduza corridor up in near Lincoln City. Cortinaria is the cutest. You'll find carpets of this in the ground under spruce. None of these Cortinarias are edible. You know, we eat one species of Cortinaria, one out of those 700, and that's the gypsy mushroom. That's a really beautiful group to look at. Cortinaria smithii is highly valued by mushroom dyers because of the bright red, orange, or purple colors you can get from a dye in natural fiber, you know, wool or silk. And there's a lot of purple Cortinarias. So people recognize purple mushrooms. I mean, they notice them. That's you know, if I'm walking through the woods and somebody sees me looking at mushrooms, first of all, you know, 90% of them will pretend they don't see me. Don't acknowledge that weirdo looking at mushrooms. The other 10% will say, "Oh, did you see those purple mushrooms back there?" It catches people's eye. And so stuff like Cortinarius violacea, deep royal purple across the fruit body. Cortinarius triganus, a really common one. It smells like ripe pears. So these are just, you know, common Cortinarius out there. The live oak zone, as we go further south, more Cortinarius. Completely, like different groups. This one has these slime girdles on the stem. Big long stem. I think it's just so long so it can add extra girdles. I mean, the stem in this thing can go down 6-8 inches into the duff. Primary oak duff is really light, you know, really loose and deep usually, so they have long stems to get out of that. Beridi rubescens, this beautiful straw green one that, I mean, if you've hunted the oaks, you know, Smith River drainage, it's fairly common in that area. Cortinarius valingae, another really common one, named after Elsa Valinga. She's a mycologist at UC Berkeley. So she has her own court now, and that's because she collected it and gave it to somebody saying, you know, this thing's different, it needs a name. The oak zone is also where you start getting a lot of amanitas. So who knows what an amanita is? Most of you, I hope, right? So if you're starting off with mushroom hunting, and you're interested in eating mushrooms, what I tell people is you should learn the mushrooms that will kill you. Because if you do that, and when you make a mistake, and unfortunately for a lot of people it's when and not if, who here has made a mistake? Who here has children? So there's edible amanitas. But the problem with that is there's deadly toxic amanitas.
Right.
So if you eat this thinking that it's this one, which you're gone or in a really bad place. Yeah. So stuff like Amanita ocreata, it's an oak-associated species. You can find it inland, kind of, you know, pretty much wherever you find oaks. It's a lot more common as you go further south in California. Amanita phalloides, introduced species. It's not native to North America. It's introduced from Europe. It came to California on cork oak. They were trying to, you know, bring in the cork oak for wine corks. That didn't work, but it brought this mushroom, which found coast live oak and took off. And so now in a lot of, you know, in a lot of California now in live oak forest, this is the most common mushroom you will find. Something that wasn't there 60 years ago is now everywhere. It's fairly common over like in the Ashland, Medford area. So, you know, do know this mushroom, because if you accidentally eat this thing, it will not be pleasant. There's treatments for it now, but if you do eat it, you don't escape without major liver and or kidney damage. So even in the best cases. Amanitas do funny things like come in pigmentless forms. So there's white form of Amanita phalloides, the death cap. But this can happen with any Amanita. They can just have these pigmentless forms. Calyptoderma, there's a lot of this one out right now. This is one of the edible Amanitas. It's not a beginner's mushroom, because if you make a mistake identifying that, you'll be dead. If you make a mistake with the chanterelle, and most people, you'll confuse it for a Lactarius or a false chanterelle, you'll survive. You may be embarrassed and have an unpleasant evening, but you can live to tell someone about it, or not tell someone, as it'll probably be. Amanita muscaria, the fly agarix. You get a lot of this here. And this is a fun one because if you're driving up and down Highway 101, you go by these spruce zones, you can see tons of them lining the road. I mean, I nicknamed these, like the southern portion of 101, I consider the Amanita Highway. Because on the right years, you drive down that road and it's lined with these things. Amanita peridii is this really rare thing that grows out in wet meadows. So you never know where you're going to find an Amanita. But it's not a very diverse group in Western North America. I mean, 35 to 40 species total. So you can learn all of them pretty quickly and call yourself an Amanita expert. It's not that hard here.
Did you get Smithiana here?
Yeah, Smithiana right here. This is one that you should know because it looks really similar and smells sometimes similar to Matsutake. So it's a mushroom that, we'll get to Matsutake in a second. It seems like this talk wants me to go quicker. Satan's bully is one of these bullies with oaks. It's a really toxic species. Beautiful mushroom, that really bulbous stem, swollen in the middle, narrow apex, red pores. Do not eat this mushroom because it'll make you quite sick. Another one with the oaks is Boletus or Swillellus amygdalinus. It's called the liver bolete, another red pore thing. The best rule for West Coast is to stay away from the red pored boletes. The yellow pored stuff like Oreo boletus, which is a bright yellow Oreo, golden pore, with a slippery cap, so it's unusual. And queen boletes. Who goes inland for these? Tan oak forest. Did you get a bunch of them earlier this year? Yeah. So when you get those early rains, look for this mushroom. Because you get into the tan oak or the oak or chinkapin forest, you can get a lot of it, but you really need those September, early October rains, and then, which every 3, 4, or 5 years, you can get big flushes of these. And one of the porcini, which, the king bolete, this is one of the easiest mushrooms to recognize, and one of the best edible ones, and really common here. So you have a couple varieties on it. Boletus edulis variety grand edulis growing with the pines. And so this is a little bit more reddish cap color. The pores develop that reddish blush as they age. They have this really big club-like stem. Soft, spongy tube layer. So boletes are fleshy pored mushrooms. They often have a really faint reticulation, which is like this raised fishnet-like network on top of the stem. Fairly easy to recognize. And sometimes, like up here in the spruce, it can look like this. You gotta get to spots where someone hasn't been there before you. Or go to Alaska. Alaska can be like this for as far as you can see, and nobody's picking you. It's funny, when I'm up there, the mycologist who usually hosts me, Kate Moe, has this rule that if it has a single wormhole, it doesn't mean passing grade. Can you imagine doing that here? No. Yeah. And so last time we were out, she got about 50 pounds of her, it's not even A grade, it's like A++ grade stuff, in about an hour without really trying. Single wormhole doesn't count.
So where in Alaska?
About 40 miles from Anchorage. Girdwood.
That's a pretty big area.
It's not that big. You gotta remember because there's very few trees there. You don't have to go very high up. It's mountains right down to the coast, and it's growing with Sitka spruce. So Kenai Peninsula, pretty much, I mean, road hunt the Kenai Peninsula in August if you want. Not this year, because I didn't get any rain this year. It's becoming
Wow.
a difficult place to mushroom hunt. You know, they had the hottest July on record and the driest July on record, which meant 0 mushrooms. Not good. And it's the second time it's happened now in 5 years. But it also means that if they get rain next year, there'll be bullies everywhere because they skipped the year. That's what usually happens. So every second or third year is a giant bully flush year. And 2 years ago was just too much of it. And there really is, I mean, there's only so much, you know, so many boletes you can eat. Okay, speaking of so much chanterelles, who knows what a chanterelle is? Or who doesn't know what a chanterelle is? Okay. They're these big orange mushrooms that people eat and say they're good. For the life of me, I don't know why. So Cantarellus californicus, this name is now a little bit misleading because I found it in Oregon last week. Before it was just known from California, it's no longer the case. It's an oak-associated chanterelle that is the largest known chanterelle species in the world. A single specimen can get over 2 pounds, you know, single fruit body. Up here, you mostly get Cantarellus formosus, the Pacific golden chanterelle. Unfortunately, it's a species complex, and I'm sure that people who pick chanterelles regularly won't notice that. You get the pale, slender species, and you get the big, stocky, bright orange ones. Yeah, there's more than one thing going by that name. Roseocanis, often called the summer chanterelle or the rainbow chanterelle, is one you're more likely to find over the summer on the coast with fruits, but it also fruits in the fall and winter. And that's on the pinkish cap when young, bright yellow, golden yellow to orange underside. So really bright colored. The white chanterelles, subalbidus, a little bit more common inland. Really likes madrone, really likes mature / old growth Douglas fir. So you'll find a bunch of different habitat types. And Cantarellus cascadensis, it's on the coast, but not all that common here. More common like in the central Cascades of Oregon. So all chanterelles have kind of like that ruffled margin to them, the blunt ridges on the other side, not individual blade-like gills. They pretty much all stain orangish, especially the white chanterelle. So when you bruise them, they develop that tone. So older white chanterelles will look a lot like cascadensis. Which starts off with an egg-like yellow cap, and that's free-range eggs, not, cage eggs. Quite different color. It's one of the funny things is mycologists used to use the term egg yolk yellow as a color, and it's a really deep orange yellow color. Most people's concept of egg yolk yellow is a pale drab yellow now. So it's quite the difference there. And then, Roseocanis is a coastal spruce or high elevation spruce forest. And so these are, the 4 chanterelles you're going to find up in this area. Omphalus olivacens, some people mistake this for chanterelle. I haven't seen this mushroom north of Humboldt County, but if you have oak, it could potentially occur up here, at least inland from here. If you mistake this for a chanterelle, get a new hobby. Pick birding, because people frown upon you when you eat spotted owl. I don't understand why. People don't frown when you eat the cauliflower mushroom, right? People eat that. Yeah, that's not a very common mushroom. Where do you go to find that? Old growth forest, really large trees usually. That's pretty much its habitat. That's not a very big habitat. It's not a super common mushroom. I know you see it every once in a while. You probably pick it every time you see it. But that mushroom's declined quite a bit. Spotted owl barbecue. But this thing is highly toxic. It'll be really unpleasant for quite some time. Lots of vomiting and diarrhea. Explosive from both ends. Tan-oak madrone forest. So you're in the northern portion of this habitat. It continues south. Tan-oak two really like good stands of this down to Santa Cruz County, but it does, I mean, there's scattered stands south of there. If I was going to, like I said earlier, if I was going to a single forest type, especially for edibles, this is the forest type I would go to. Because it has tons of these. Black trumpets. So who goes up the river valleys here into the Tan Oak and picks black trumpets? Okay, who doesn't? Now you know. Who's mad at me for giving away your spots? So, like, I mean, I know that people from California come up here because your street's up here. When I mean, it's up now, so barely, but it's up. But typically December, early January, you wouldn't expect to find mushrooms out there, but you go out in the woods and you look at these little ruffled, dried up leaves, a little hole in the middle. You walk by them half the time, you won't even notice them. But once you get the knack for finding them, they often grow in really large patches, and you could literally be standing in the middle of a patch and not know it. It is, in many people's opinions, the best edible mushroom, wild mushroom, better than truffles. It's really unique. It has a really sweet, fruity, I know musty is not the right term, but it's just a really strong flavor to it, really complex mix of flavors. Dries really well, so if you find a lot of it, you can dry it out. Flavor enhances when it's dry, and unmistakable. And there's really nothing else like it. Matsutake loves those tan oak forests. Of course, it grows with pretty much everything else as well, especially shore pine up here. But this is one that, who smelled this mushroom? And if you haven't, go upstairs and smell it. There's plenty on the table. If you like that odor, you will love eating this mushroom.
Yeah.
If you don't like that odor, give it away to somebody else, because they will love eating it, and you will love not having it around anymore. It's a really, once again, complex odor, but the musty side of this is, David Arroyo states it's a provocative mix of cinnamon red hots and dirty gym socks. And, aptly describes it. It's either the spicy cinnamon odor or, the spicy, once again, complex, or it's like an outhouse. So some people smell that and love that odor. Some people just recoil that. And I used to really like this. So this is a mushroom that I used to eat quite a bit of. One of the few mushrooms I ate. But then I just got to a point where just cooking it in the same room, I would turn my nose up and have to leave the room. Yeah. It's a really unique odor. So to recognize this mushroom, it's really rubbery texture. So if you drop it, it bounces. I mean, the Amanita smithiana that Anna pointed out a few slides ago, it's a look-alike to this thing and can have quite a strong odor to it. And if you don't really know the odor, it could be similar. But that has a really flocculent veil tissue to it, so it breaks apart easily. If you were to push your thumb into the stem of the matsutake, it's really firm because it's really dense, rubbery flesh. If you were to do that to an amanita, you put your thumb right through the stem. And then the amanita typically has a bulbous stem base that tapers down, or Amanita savicola has more of a rounded base, and that's more flocculent white colors. This mushroom develops these orange scales as it ages, and the partial veil is membranous and sheathing, so you can see it covers up the gills as almost like a continuation of the stem up over the cap margin, and then disintegrates as it gets older. So the veil it almost liquefies. So and gills are really crowded on it, stain orangish in age, and that odor. So go upstairs and smell it. You don't have to leave yet, but another one to go upstairs and smell is the candy cap. Because as this mushroom dries out, it develops a maple sugar odor. So it's one that, once again, there's some on the table upstairs. I believe Mike brought in some yesterday. Tan oak forest up here, it loves that forest type. It grows with Douglas fir as well. It grows with oaks, so pines, more three-needle pine. Monterey pine I really like, but it also grows with bishop pine. Have you seen a shore pine? No.
No.
So it's a nondescript orange lactarius, that has latex, so this whitish juice when you cut it or break it. The textured cap is like citrus skin, kind of that weird roughened texture, really fragile, hollow stipe. When it's fresh, it sort of has the odor of fenugreek, but when it dries, it's the maple sugar odor. And one of the easiest ways to do that in the field, if you have a lighter or a flame, is just burn a little piece of the cap margin, and it'll develop that smell when it's burning. Or stick a piece of it in the microwave for about 20, 30 seconds, and it'll dry it, dry it to smell it. Because when it's fresh, it has a different odor to it. And one funny thing is, like, if you're looking at your mushrooms of Redwood Coast, and it has like that little summary box of what makes a candy cap, somehow, between printer proof and the book actually getting printed, they misspelled caps as C-W-A-P. We have no idea how it got in. So that quack.
Wow.
It does have quite a few lookalikes. This is what occurs in this area minus this one and this one. Everything else is up here. There's a lot of them. So every single one of these mushrooms has one of those features that doesn't match up. So the features, the roughened cap, that citrus peel-like cap, the watery white latex, the hollow stipe, that odor. So the close one, so if you did cap texture, you would have two mushrooms. This one and this one have similar cap texture. This one has a solid stipe. This one has a hollow stipe, but it has a really thick, creamy latex. So, 3 out of the 4 features match, but one doesn't. So don't convince yourself that, oh, Lecturia subvicitus, very common everywhere up here. Just a really common Pacific Northwest mushroom. It has a slimy cap that's smooth and really white latex, thick white latex. Unfortunately, people pick this thing and think it's candy caps. And so there was actually a talk I was doing for one of the clubs in Washington, and someone brought in their special candy cap cookies, because you can make desserts out of candy caps. I mean, the flavor of it, they're not sweet, but it has a maple sugar flavor. And it really permeates anything you put it with. Sugar and butter, pretty much, sugar cookies, or whipped cream, or candy cap popcorn, ice cream. If you're down in Mendocino, Frankie's in Fort Bragg, or the ice cream shop in Mendocino sell the candy cap ice cream. Don't pass it up. Give it a try. Anyway, they brought in their candy cap cookies, and I knew right away that it was made of the Lactarius that was not a candy cap. They were mushroom cookies. They were not candy cap. Probably all of these things are harmless, except for maybe Lactarius rufus, that a super strong peppery taste to it. It's something that if you bite into, it's actually delayed, so it takes about 20 seconds. And if you're into playing cruel pranks on people in the woods, which, I kind of am, you can bite into the same thing. It tastes like chocolate. And you can keep a straight face for about 20 seconds. And then after that, there'll just be saliva dripping out of your mouth, because your mouth will be burning up. Just super acrid taste to it. Chemically peppery. So keep an eye out for candy caps, because they're starting to come up a little bit later in the year. Certainly like in November, December mushroom, but they are starting to come up. The time is whenever the next rain comes, then it's time. Next week. Who knows what's going to happen too? Like, are you going to get a second bolete flush? Because you've had this full summer now. So can you get that rain and then get that first flush again? Maybe. I mean, because this isn't out of norm for what was out of norm, or at least current norms, is having that rain in September or early October. Having that drenching rain then. Typically the rains will come mid-October, early November, and then stuff will come up. But we had that false start. 5-yard penalty, right? Not very many football fans here. Oyster mushrooms, who knows these? It's an easy one. Few different species here. You don't have to know which species you have. Just know that they have that lateral stipe off to one side, growing on wood, white spores, a little bit rubbery texture to them almost. That's probably an oyster mushroom. There's a couple lookalikes, but they're not going to harm you. At least hopefully not. Depends on what you think looks alike. And just to highlight something else, is in that habitat, pretty much in every single habitat, like I mentioned before, you have specialized fruiters. So you have mushrooms that only occur in that habitat. And so on the bark of madrone trees, the next time it's like a really wet period, a long wet period, I want you to walk through and smell. If you're near a mature madrone, smell for rotting garlic. And if you smell that, stop and look at the bark, because on the bark there'll be a mushroom that's about a 1/4 inch across that reeks of rotting garlic. And the only place that mushroom grows is on the bark of madrone trees. It's the only spot the species Microphylla arbiticula, which means madrone loving, is the only spot that mushroom will grow. So one really unnatural habitat is wood chips. So this is a completely artificial habitat. So if you're out in the woods, what do you get? You get a tree that blows over every once in a while, and it'll splinter up some. You get like a few splinters of wood thrown aside, right? So that's your, that's your wood chip, natural wood chip. Or you get like a, debris running down a river and, getting thrown up in the bank, broken up a little bit. Well, we made wood chippers, which made mushroom junk food. Bite-sized pieces of candy for them. And then it's spread out, like nice and thin. And then we even water it most of the time. It's like ideal. And so you get carpets of mushrooms growing in that habitat. Most of the wood chip fungi, however, are not native to this area. They are, a majority of them are introduced fungi. Most of them don't escape this habitat. And a few of the native things do make it in there, but here's one of the introduced ones to California. It's from Mediterranean Europe. It's one of these stinkhorns I was talking about. So it starts off as these golf ball-like eggs, and then it bursts forth, and you see this like greenish goo. As it gets darker, it matures. That's the spore mass, and it smells like rotten meat. And that attracts flies and stuff. So the flies have this nice big landing cage. They land on that, they wallow through that spore mass. They get covered with spores, they fly off, the spores dry as they fly off, and get spread. When they're immature, they don't have that rotting meat odor. It's kind of like crunchy, cucumber-ish odor and texture to it. So I decided, well, why not? I'll try eating it, see how it is. I'm not edible. And I swear, I cook these things out. They kind of, have you ever cooked like wood ears in a pan? You watch them like pop around, like they'll even bounce out of your pan? You haven't tried that? Try it. Anyway, these kind of did that, and I ate them. So half an hour later, I swear these things matured in my stomach, and I started just like burping up stinkhorn breath. It was rather unpleasant. Yeah, I'll skip next time. Wood chip morels, an introduced morel species in wood chips. Culinarily, not very good. The best way to describe this is it tastes like stale cardboard. It's nothing like these morels you get out in the forest around here. It was a really disappointing thing. Some people eat it and don't know any better, I guess. But if you've ever hunted morels in the spring, which really don't occur on the coast, I mean, unless you're under those riparian zones with ash, or but that's more interior valleys and stuff, or get into the Cascades, especially on the east side in the spring. Some of the Lauradiomyces, this particular one was introduced from Australia. The chip cherry is a really common thing here. So very ambiguous, probably a native fungus that came out, found the wood chips, and now takes over that habitat. It loves that habitat and the junk food. And of course, people hunt wood chips for these things. I mean, enough people come up and ask me about them. The magic mushrooms, psilocybe. I've never tried them. I personally have no interest in trying them, but each day has her own. I know that, half this room just woke up when I showed this slide. if you are going to, so the misconception is that most psilocybe around here are wood chip species. They are not the dung species. The dung species you hear about are subtropical and tropical species. Gulf states, Florida especially, that's where you go for those. They are not up here. There's one species of psilocybe semilanceata, the Liberty caps, which will be in fields that have elk or cow or horse dung, and they don't grow on the dung, they grow around the dung. So you'll have the dung pile, he's hunting them.
Next season.
Yes, you'll have the pile of dung and the fall, so you'll have that much thicker clump of grass, which the grazing animals won't touch because they don't want to eat around their own dung. But then in that thicket of grass, the following season is when you'll get the Liberty caps. They are quite common on the coast, yeah. But of course, the wood chip species, especially Psilocybe cyanescens, pretty much anywhere you have wood chips down, you can find these things. Very common on the Oregon coast. One thing, if you are hunting this mushroom, you have to be aware of this thing. Because this thing will kill you if you accidentally eat it. They grow in the same wood chip beds, side by side. There's a spot I was up in Tacoma. It was actually quite funny because I was walking through this park in Tacoma. I was just like visiting friends and bored up in Washington. And so I just went for a walk in the park, and it's like, oh yeah, there's Psilocybe, oh yeah, there's Gallorhina. So it's like, okay, I'll go back and grab my camera because they're growing side by side. And as I'm like walking away, this probably 15-year-old kid comes by, and he like stops and says, oh, got him, score! And so, he was like looking down. I just said to him, and I said, you do know what Gallorhina are, right? It's like, yeah, I got him, man. And then I start walking away, and he yells, Mom, I found a whole bunch of them. So here was this kid out hunting shrooms with his mom. I guess, family bonding. So the deadly Gallorhina, it has brown spores, and the Psilocybe have purplish black spores. The danger here is that Gallorhina stems darken blackish from the base up as they age. These are all fairly young still. And people see that blackening and convince themselves it's the blue staining of Psilocybe. I've seen this happen multiple times. And I've had people argue with me saying I just want to take their mushrooms from them. And I was like, this is a Gallorhina, this is why a Gallorhina, it is a Gallorhina, you can go home and decide. I haven't heard from any of them since, but I don't know if there's a reason for that or not. But the Gallorhina do kill people who are eating them thinking that they're Psilocybe. So that's, once again, if you are interested in collecting those species, you have to know about this one. Because this is a common sight on the Oregon coast. That gets a wow for you. The last habitat I'll mention is the coastal pine forest. Up here you get the shore pine, the Pinus catorta var catorta. As you go further south, you get the bishop pine, which is kind of north of the Bay Area, and Monterey pine south of the Bay Area, both fairly localized in distribution. They're relatively small spots. And this is bishop pine at Point Reyes. With that, you get a lot of Lecturius deliciosus, except we do not have this mushroom in the States. This is the actual European Lecturius deliciosus. And what's even more frustrating about this is Lecturius deliciosus introduced to Australia, growing with Monterey pine, of course introduced to Australia from California. So you have the European mushroom growing with the California pine. But you come back home, and it's a really good mushroom. It lives up to the name. It's really sweet flavor, nice meaty texture to it. Has anybody eaten these Lecturius deliciosus group around here? Apparently. Do you like them?
No.
Okay, so the reason is we don't have Lecturius deliciosus here. We have things we call Lecturius deliciosus. So you probably don't have this one up here. This grows in Monterey pine down in the Bay Area. It has orange latex that goes a little bit reddish. If we look at this one, really, no more Psilocybe. If we look at this, zony cap, orange latex that stays bright orange, a little bit green staining, but not much. This one,
More green.
more green, concentric zoning, orange latex that goes a little bit reddish. Okay, so this thing grows pine down the Bay Area. Not Lecturius deliciosus, needs a new name. We know that now.
Okay.
Deliciosus variety areolatus is the common one up here with short pine. So the latex on this, so when you cut it, it leaves just a little bit more orangish brown color.
Yeah.
It's not bright orange. And the staining on it's a little bit more turquoise green. Okay, so we have that one. The problem now with the name stuff, the nomenclature stuff, we know it's not Lecturius deliciosus. Can't use that anymore. Separate species known from Europe. It's not a variety of that species. We can't elevate variety name, Lecturius variety, the variety areolatus, because there already is an existing name, Lecturius areolatus, for a separate species. So it needs a new name. This thing is one of your common ones with spruce. So get out of the pine into the spruce. You'll find this one that stains green. It's like you look at it funny, it'll turn green. And it has orange latex that goes more purplish or vinaceous or really dark red. So growing with spruce, lots of green staining, different color, orange latex to purple. Same issue, not deliciosus, can't elevate that because there's already a Lecturius pisceus. Pisceus, referring to spruce. There's this one, which finally got a new name a couple of years ago, Lecturius aestivus. Well, if you go into the brand fir or hemlock forest, you can find this one. Bright orange colors, hardly any green staining to it, very scant orange latex. Most of the time, you don't even notice that it's a milk cap because you won't even bleed milk. But fairly bright. I mean, the screen doesn't justify how bright orange this thing is. So this one's okay, I guess. Have the same issues, grainy texture, metallic taste. Lecturius aurantiosauridus. I'm going to, as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to throw this clicker away. Aurantiosauridus, one described about 5 years ago from spruce, from Redwood National Park actually. It's this small brownish orange one growing with spruce. So until 5 years ago, all of these things are called Lecturius deliciosus. A couple of them use variety names, so Oliviciosaurus, it just refers to dirty olive color, because that's what it typically is. A little bit more greenish flesh tones, really muted colors compared to the rest of them. So if we take all of these things, well, what do we have here? We have 5 different species of what we used to call Lecturius deliciosus, none of which are the same as the European species. And unfortunately, when we look at mushrooms closer, we realize that a lot of our groups are like this. Across the board, like short-stalk Russula, Russula brevipes. There's at least 5 species under that name in this area. It's frustrating. I mean, and it's made it so mycology has, it's really 2 sets. There's the field guide names for everything, the names that we can actually communicate to the general public. Because if I tell you, Lecturius aurantiosauridus aestivus, that thing we call deliciosus, but it's really not, it makes it really difficult to communicate these things. Because the main issue is the fungal world is a lot more complex than we give it credit for. We want things to be easy, and they never are. So if we were going to have common names for this whole group, so that's a big complaint, right? I've spent half this talk telling you names that you won't remember. Because most of these things don't have common names. There's no standard common names for fungi. Yes, the golden chanterelle has a common name, but that golden chanterelle is 30 different species across North America. It's a common name applied to a lot of different things. Luckily, white chanterelle is only 1. So, black trumpets is 3 or 4. So if we were to have common names for this group, it would have to be something like this. We could go with this, but
Go with it. Will any of these make you sick?
I'm sick of mushrooms in general. Sick of proscenium, no. And I will point out, because I do get a lot of flack from people who like eating a bleeding milk cap, like Lactaris rubra, that is not included on this slide. That one's actually decent. Okay, it's not a delicious milk, it's a bleeding milk cap. And then there's going to be one person in the room who's going to say, I love those mushrooms and I can't believe you're doing this to my mushrooms. Not so far, you can speak up, I won't be offended. So, if you are interested in more fungi of California, you can come down to this, the Santa Cruz Mycoflora foray in December 12th to 15th. This was a foray that Christian and I ran for a few years before passing it off to the Santa Cruz Club. Our start for this foray was trying to get 15 to 20 experts and we originally started with 140 people out in the woods collecting fungi. So people would come there and they collect their edibles and they would learn about fungi. And from that, we would get all these collections that were people bringing in, like 300 species or so, for the Santa Cruz Mycoflora Project. And what the Santa Cruz Mycoflora Project is, Christian started this as a way to map all known species in Santa Cruz County, California. Start off small, build from there. So these, so far almost 1,000 species known from the second smallest county in California. But you gotta remember, it's in a mixing zone. So if you're interested in this foray, I think there's only about 20 spots left. It has Elsa Belinga, who's one of the leading taxonomists, fungal taxonomists in the world. She's currently at UC Berkeley, but not for much longer. Steve Trudell, who's the author of Mushrooms of the Pacific Northwest. He'll be joining us down there. Susie Holmes, who actually came to your fair here. She's the biology instructor at Lane Community College and one of the better mycologists in Oregon. She knows more mushrooms than most people here. Chad Hyatt, who just released a cookbook last year, Mushroom Hunter's Kitchen, and he uses mushrooms in dishes that you normally wouldn't use mushrooms in. You wouldn't think of using mushrooms in. So he has ways of, it's like Russell Abrevipes hummus. You would never know there was a mushroom in there. And it's actually good. I rarely say that mushrooms taste good, but he has an ability to take stuff like Psilocybe, the slippery jacks that you would ignore, and make them edible.
Wow.
I know, it's surprising. But he does it. And he can teach you how to do it. Rick Kerrigan, who's the author of Agaricus of North America, will be there. He's recently retired from Pennsylvania back to California, where he got his start with David Aurora at UC Santa Cruz. So he's coming back home, so to speak. Milton Tam from PSMS, who has this way of making oyster mushroom kits with kitty litter and rabbit food, pretty much, and makes it really, it's this super easy way to grow oyster mushrooms at home that costs about $2 a bag. You get like 3-4 pounds from. So it's a really fascinating method that he developed to do this. Making oyster mushroom kits. Thea Chesney, who's she's actually going to be a co-author with Christian and I on the forthcoming Mushrooms of the California Mountains. She works for the Forest Service and gets to travel around all of California. She was a forestry student at UC Berkeley, but spent a lot of her free time in the mycology lab and really knows fungi well. And I did say I would come back for it. It's like I'm only doing 2 California events this year, and this will be one of them. And Christian Schwartz, who's a Santa Cruz resident, will be leading all the walks down there. So if you are interested in this, it's hosted by the Santa Cruz Club this year, which is a really good mushroom club. I don't know if anybody's made it down for their fungus fair in January. Another good road trip when it's winter up here. But it's in Scotts Valley, California, right outside of Santa Cruz. So something to look into if you're interested, because it's quite the fascinating area down there. Anyway, thank you very much.